And we are live.
And we're live. Thanks everybody for joining for this new webinar, Mix with the Masters webinar. We're very excited today. It's a very special day. This is our 14th week of webinars. We've been doing these quite often, but this is the first time we actually inviting a film composer to join us for about an hour and answer some of your questions. Today we're with the incredible John Powell. How are you, John?
Very good, very well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining and doing this with us. I think there's already a lot of questions, and the floor is yours if you want to answer some of them.
Okay, the first one I saw that I can give you an idea on, Martin A.L. Hi, John. What advice would you give to young composers who don't necessarily have films to score, would like to start practicing? I don't know if I've said this before, but one of the things I used to do when I started, before I had any work whatsoever, and I was trying to learn how to write on the notator system, which was on an Atari ST, I did, what do you call it, little pieces about all the people I knew. I'd write a piece that tried to, like, I think I was inspired by Elgar's Enigma Variations, which are variations based on his friends. So I wrote several pieces about my sister. One was called Playing Hockey, which was a very violent piece. And then I did a piece that I called Soup Making, which was my grandmother making soup. And I just did sort of little portraits of people I knew and tried to bring out some character that I thought about them myself. So it was quite a fun thing to do, because you get to think about a character in your life you really know very well. You don't need a filmmaker to explain everything to the audience. And you can then try and write music that gives the core of their character as you see it, because it's somebody you know very well. And then if you were to then do it for a film, once you have the character from the film, as long as you then get to know that character, you've already sort of practiced writing these portraits. And a portrait of a character, I think, is one of the building blocks for me of trying to capture the music for the film. Obviously, the portrait of a character or a thematic idea, whether it's as simple as heroicism or sadness or a place or wherever you are. So that's an idea for you all right. What else? Do I use 4-stave piano sketches to sketch my ideas? From Andrew Barraclough. I don't. No, I write, I scribble out tunes and things. I never sketch on paper to picture. But the melodies, yes, I need to put that on paper often to try and hack out exactly how it goes. And I have these big sheets of paper that are kind of, they look like short score staves. But really what I do is I write alternates of tunes, and I just write bits of tunes and chord sequences all over them. And then there's a lot of arrows pointing, which when I went to John Williams' house on solo, I was very pleased when I looked at his sketch pads that he had as well. He'd written things this way, and then he'd also written some things this way as well on the paper. And so he was, and then he had arrows going everywhere. And I discovered that I do the same, except mine are messy and I can't even read them. And his were beautifully written and very elegant. So let's say, when you're scoring, do you mix mock-ups, demos in 5.1 or just in stereo? I listen in a kind of a 5.1 when I'm writing in my room. I have some sounds that are 5.1. Any of my own sort of personal libraries of percussion and other instruments, I quite often make those in 5.1 so that I can use them in the final the final mix. So I listen to them in 5.1, and then orchestral sounds are all stereo, because it's just, even though all of the libraries you could make into 5.1, they're all perfectly, they're almost all available as, you know, or in a mix setup, a mic setup that you could turn into 5.1 yourself. The problem with it is it just takes so many voices that I've yet to find any computers that will handle it. I mean, so I then just take the stereo of the orchestral sounds and I just add a little bit of surround reverb to that, just to try and make it all fit in, so that in my writing room I have a 5.1 kind of fake sound going. And we do record that, and when I need to record off a mix of that, I'll just print it in 5.1 and then fold down into stereo as well. If I'm working on songs and things that will be stereo, then I just collapse the room to stereo and don't use anything 5.1. Aaron Berkson, for a Prussian Requiem, what was your creative process, and how was that similar or dissimilar to your approach to film scores? Well, that was a long one, a long process, because I was, as the First World anniversary, the beginning of the First World War in 2014 was coming up, I thought I should try and write that war requiem that I'd always meant to write. And so I started investigating stories, and once I found a story that I liked, I got my very good friend Michael Petrie, who I've worked with since I was at college, to write the libretto. And he wrote, I gave him a story kind of idea, and he just wrote, you know, lots of sections, and then I edited it down a little bit and reorganized a few things until I found a sort of a form and a structure that I liked. And once the libretto, as it were, even though that's for opera and not really oratorio, was correct, I then had a beginning. I knew where to go, and the process of doing that was probably a couple of years. But more interestingly, I hope, was that I realized that I have now got into the habit of needing story and needing a story I understand to write music again. That's not for film, but I still needed a story. So that's why it took me such a long time to get to a point at which I could actually start writing the Prussian Requiem, which told me something, which is that these years in film music have affected my kind of idea of what structure and form is, which was both interesting, exciting, and also a little worrying, because there's sometimes there's things about music that are so wonderfully vague that you don't really need a story. But I think if I go back and look at how I've been writing some other works that I'm doing at the moment, and will come out, I guess, next year or whenever I can get to an orchestra, some of them are more vague, even though there is a story inside. I think that's the thing for me. Storytelling, the literal storytelling in filmmaking, and the storytelling that's always in music that I've always loved, I've always seen the links between them. I hear a story in Brahms' symphonies, and the best films I've worked on have a story that isn't the story they tell you. It's the story that's underneath the subtext. And that's the much more interesting story. And that's when it feels like art to me, as it does in music. Let's see. So half of this hour will be me spent reading, because I'm dyslexic, so it takes me a minute. Okay. How do I create mock-ups in the DAW? By importing tracks from notation software, playing yourself with the keyboard, improvising directly into the DAW to fill in the orchestration. Yes, is the answer, Cyril Girard. All of those, except I don't really use notation software at the beginning. We only use that really at the end, normally Spalius. But yeah, I mean, I'm writing things down. I'll then play things into the door. I'll then program things into the door. Sometimes I play just with elbows and stuff and just rhythms. I almost just play rhythms into the door, and don't care about the notes. And if there's a bit of rhythm I like, even if the notes are terrible, I'll go in and I'll try and adjust the notes in the edit window until the rhythm, which is intriguing, support, until the melodies or the harmony in the rhythms are more interesting to me. So it's a very kind of obtuse way of getting to things, but I'm not a great pianist, so I can't just improvise straight in. I do improvise somewhat, but it's normally a bit rubbish. And then orchestration in the door. Oh yes, everything is done in the door. Every part is there. Every color is painted. And that could be me. Yes, I can do it. And I do some of it, but I also have a team of people sometimes that on these films that I use, and they're kind of more like orchestrators, assistant composers, additional arrangers, all these kind of terms. It can be very very wide range of things that I ask of the team, as far as film scores go, because you have so much music to do and you have to produce it to a almost finished state in order to be able to get it approved. So you don't go near an orchestra or musicians until everybody's happy with it, which means it has to be finished. So the irony of it is that it takes so much time to, write the music. It takes so much time to arrange it, to orchestrate it, but that's even before we get to an orchestra. That's just to be able to present it to directors and the filmmakers. And once they like it, and then we carry on, and then we bring in another team of different people who then kind of do this orchestration transcription from the synth mock-ups with all the samples. But really, I don't know if you look at on my YouTube page, there's playlists of interviews and there's playlists of lots of things that will have, some of these videos where you can go from, real orchestra to the mock-up, and it doesn't change significantly. So everything is there. But yes, it's a mixture of me and 2 or 3 other people helping to get it to that point at which I can present it and then get it approved. And then once it's approved, I've had films where the directors don't really need to come to the orchestral sessions. Basically, they've heard it and they've approved it, and I don't really change it at that point. And some scores I have changed quite a lot on the scoring stage, but they tend to be films where we're more vague about what the music should be doing. Let's see, here's something about access to, I just saw that. Well, how do you develop, Noah Charles, how do you develop a musical voice sound that's unique and different to other composers? I just look to what I liked in music since the first time I started listening to music. I've said this many times, and so excuse me if I'm repeating myself, but it's very important that you honor the life you have led, and you honor every piece of music you've ever listened to and liked and disliked, up to this point, up to now. So, you could say, okay, my style is everything I've ever heard up to today. But if I was 14, it was at that point everything I'd heard up to 14. So your style's going to keep changing. But when I was 14, the say sort of 7 years, I'd already been absolutely fascinated by music. I'd heard a lot of music, played a lot of music. Up to that point, that was everything that I knew of music and I loved of music, and I decided I didn't like in music. And all of those elements had gone in and became what I perceived as the music I loved, which was a mishmash of things. And later on, I think it probably took me until about I was 21 to effectively, so another 7 years later, I'd heard another 7 years of music, but I'd also figured out a bit better how to boil that all down and try and find the things that I loved in music and fetishized in music. Very specific orchestration techniques, particular musical harmonic movement, particular shapes and melodies. I mean, it's that kind of feeling about music. It's not just a general feeling of music. I mean, I can listen to pieces and get a general feeling, but I will forget them. And it doesn't, certain pieces I'm aware that they are what they're doing, but nothing goes in. And every now and again now, it's getting less and less as I get older. So something goes in and I'll never forget it, and I'll never forget the feeling of it, and I'll always remember how it's constructed. I'll remember badly enough that I don't think it comes out too clearly. I mean, sometimes it does. I mean, you can all hear that in what I write. But the trick is to find all the things that you've ever loved in your life in music and use them. That doesn't mean use them wholesale. In fact, it's very important that you never use one of them alone. You always need to add another one. So if you liked something by U2, but you also like something by Messiaen, so use the harmonic language of Messiaen and the driving kind of, bass and drums and, edge guitar of the U2 track, and put those two things together. And I guarantee you it's not really going to sound like anybody else if those are two unusual things that you actually really like. I mean, I wouldn't force it. It has to be something you love. And then each part of the piece is going to have, I'm not saying I'm talking vertically, each part. Then the music is going to have these different kind of things that you've absorbed and that you can't help but try and recreate in this kind of, in my way, in a very kind of slightly embarrassingly incorrect manner. But the feeling is there. So I'm always searching for 2, 3, 4 feelings from musical pieces that I've always loved in my life. And I think that is how I sound the way I do. Sometimes it's more obvious, as I say, you can hear, oh yeah, that's Holst. But then other times it would probably be hard to hear. The other day I heard a Judy Zook track that I hadn't heard since I was probably about 15, 16. And I realized how much that one song was an influence on many things I've done. It's called Stay With Me Till Dawn. And there's an amazing string arrangement in the middle of it. But the structure of it and the harmonic language of it is very unusual. I think very unusual still to me to this day. And it's something that I hear. But in that, I also hear Summertime by Gershwin. And in Summertime by Gershwin, I also hear there's some Rimsky-Korsakov. So, you can keep going back and find where things come from, and it sort of doesn't matter as long as you use a multiple. So always use a multiple. All right, so that was enough on that. Okay, in the score for Born Ultimatum, there's a very arabesque part in Tangiers. Do you mean arabesque as in the ballet form, or arabesque as in Arab-esque? I think that's what you mean. And now I can't find this thing again. It kept jumping. Hang on. Where was it? Sorry, I was starting to read it, and then I must have taken my finger off the thing, and it came back. It shot down. Hang on here. Here we go. Oh, there we go. Okay, very arabesque Tangiers. It's in 4/4, but feels kind of off. How do you come up with these rhythms? Krishna Lungala. It's interesting because the whole world music question is intriguing at this particular time. We're in a time where America is realizing what an incredibly racist place it is, and American music is really African American music. The art of America's music is formed in African American music. So you realize that everything we love about American music is kind of a form of music that's been stolen, and all world music is dangerous to talk about from the point of view of what do we owe others for the music we have today, and where did it come from, and why did so much music require black artists' music to be reinterpreted by white artists for it to become successful. There's so many questions about world music that I find any question about me sounding like in an Arabic beat. Which Arabic country and are we touring up? And do we actually mean North African? There's so many places we could go about the discussion of where all these rhythms come from. They come from sort of everywhere. One of the reasons I like bagpipes and accordions is they're a world instrument that come from my home and everybody else's home. It's amazing how many countries have a tradition of bagpipes, different types of bagpipes, or different type of accordions. So in answer to that question is, again, this is linked to the previous question of having listened to lots and lots of music. I have, I guess, culturally appropriated every conceivable kind of music I've ever heard and loved. And that whether that's, Burundi drumming or, or a Peter Gabriel album where he's picked up, musicians from different parts of the world and added that into his songs, which is sort of now a second-hand version of that, or whether it really is the real thing. There's so many kind of sources now that you can go to and hear world music, which wasn't the case when I was younger. I got to college and I found the most incredible resource for me was in the basement. There was a record collection at Trinity College of Music, deep in the basement. And they had all this, they had every conceivable classical piece as well, but they had a large section of world music, and that's where my eyes were finally opened. So I'm sure that even though it's in 4/4, the off, feeling kind of off would be some kind of lilting or wave. I describe it as a wave in probably actually some music by Ndudu Rose. There's a great album, I think, that was recorded by Eric Serra, I think, of his ensemble playing. And I saw them live at Royce Hall as well. And everything is on the offbeat there because of the drumming technique. You have a stick and you have a hand. So if you use your hand and that's on the downbeat, the stick is always on the offbeat, but guess what? The stick's louder. So it feels like everything's on the offbeat. So, I mean, that's one of the things I would do in a section like that. I would actually program by using that technique. When I realized that there was a technique like that, I would use I'd use the table for the on beats, and I'd use a pad with a sound for the off beats. And that allows me to kind of make rhythms that feel a bit more like what Ndudu Rose was doing, but clearly I hadn't studied it well enough, so I'm not really being accurate to it, but I'm trying to take the flavor of it. So that's a long answer to probably a question that was really sort of, which I could have answered, I guess, what samples did I use and things like that, but let's see, I'm going to go right to the end. Mr. Zalton, what do you find are the biggest challenges during the composing mock-up process now you're well into your career and having established processes? Boredom, believe it or not. And I should I should be very ashamed of saying that, and I am. Knowing where you're going, because you've done it so many times, is suddenly becoming a bit of an issue, which is that because I know how much work is involved, and I've done it before so many times, I kind of then project, oh, this is going to be boring because I know what I'm doing and I know where I'm going. And so then it becomes problematic because that's not how I should be feeling. I'm in a very privileged position to be able to do this. And also it makes for very uncreative work. So there's a head game, I think, at this point where I have to try and keep myself interested. And the only way to do that is to sort of try and find something musical that I don't feel I've ever done before, and see if I can, get into that. But again, that's time consuming. And one of the reasons I don't do as many films as I used to is that I find each film exhausting, because I am putting more pressure on myself to try and be better, which is even harder. I don't know. I'm thinking maybe next year I might take a different approach and just relax a bit and just knock out some things. See if I can not get so wound up about it. Oh, what's your opinion of the outcome of the recent Westworld scoring competition 2020? There's a very interesting one. I read Hans's note about this, which I saw and when I read it, I thought, that's brilliant. That's exactly it. That is all you need to know. Everything he said in his note gave clarity to the whole situation. And in that note, there was every single word felt like it had the answer to everything that anybody needed to know about that situation. So I'd recommend everybody to go back and read it. When I was working, when I was at Hans, as he was mentoring me, those were the kind of comments that I remember him laying on me that would like shoot you through the heart, but you suddenly came out the other side understanding about the business. They were hard comments, and I remember him giving them to me in person, sometimes in private, sometimes in front of other people. Hard, difficult comments about growing up and becoming aware of what and how things had to be and why, and to get my shit together and to mainly grow up. And so in that little thing he wrote about that competition, I think everything is there that I ever learned from Hans in those few paragraphs. I was very shocked that people then kept commenting after that, because in my opinion, they should all shut the fuck up after that point, because there was nothing else needed to be said. Absolutely nothing after Hans's comment. So that would be my answer to that. Go and read Hans's comment. It's got everything. Let's see. What style of music do you want to explore? That's a very good question. There are some types of music that I've probably never got much from and never really understood, because it was never really for me. I think one of the most amazing things I learned about rap was watching a great documentary about it, called The Art of Rap. And in it, they had a lot of rap artists recreating their raps without the track. And it suddenly occurred to me, oh, wait a minute, this is poetry. I mean, I know that's pretty basic, but the poetry of rap is it has been commonly talked about, obviously. But the problem for me had always been it never seemed to be for me. And right in that documentary, very, very clearly was made, this is not for you. Because why would it be for me? It's a music that comes from a very different society than the one I was growing up in. So it made me realize how kind of difficult it's been perhaps for me to understand music that I don't feel kind of an association to because of my society, which leads you to realize that, does that mean, is that why, you know, we have so few black composers in film music? And that's tragic. That is tragic. I guess it's a type of music that, you know, has held everybody away from, you know, I think what I'm trying to say is music has these social barriers that the music doesn't, but the barriers are then built around it. So the types of music I like to do are the types of music I don't even know about yet. There must be some joy for everyone in every kind of music, and I can either listen to it and understand it immediately, which I've thought I've always been able to do, but then other times I just see I sort of a wall of something that just doesn't make any sense to me. And it makes me realize that that must be the case for so many people in the world. That's why, you know, swapping between genres is kind of hard for people. And I've always thought I was very flexible, and I knew a lot about many types of genres, but there are limits to that, and I guess society has created them for us, and we need to keep working on that. We need to allow ourselves into everybody else's music, and try and see it, different things from other points of view, so that you understand you understand the backstory to why things are the way they are. And then I guess you suddenly appreciate it, as I did with, with that rap documentary, hearing this incredible poetry, and so musically kind of such an intriguing set of rhythmic devices. I mean, if you look at it from a compositional point of view, it was amazing to see it for the first time. I mean, everybody's gonna think, why did it take him so long to understand that? Well, I guess it was the one part of the music was holding me away, and I wasn't able to sort of get past that. So that would be the kind of music, not rap in particular, but I think what I'd love to do is do things that people don't think of me for, because they've never heard me do. And that, I've always felt I was an amateur at every kind of music I've done anyway. I've never been fabulous at any particular style that I do. I'm not, the best. I'm not very good at counterpoint. I'm not very good at, at proper harmonic voice leading. I'm not very good at, the kind of great Mahlerian orchestration techniques. I'm not really that good at programming beats. I'm not really that good at Latin American, rhythms, because I get my I keep messing up and getting all my claves in the wrong place. So all of these things I'm sort of an amateur at, but I always try and do them well enough so that when I blend them with these other things, that they become something that hopefully flows. And that's all that I care about, is whether or not it flows. All right, let's see what else there is. Sorry, I'm just going to keep. Okay, Jack Green Audio. How do you overcome hearing the same theme over and over again when working on it for weeks and weeks and months, and try not to put yourself down that it's boring or not good enough? Well, there's a couple of things come to mind about that, which is yes, I've felt that, but normally I would never spend weeks and weeks with a theme that I didn't think could be better. If I'm bored with it because it is the way it is, then I've given up, I feel. One of the things I do is I hopefully in those weeks and weeks I figure out a lot more about the melody and how to improve it and how to fix it, which means I'm constantly going back and forward through the film, because I may have taken 6 reels to get to the answer of how a tune should go, and then I'll have to go back and fix all the cues that I did in reels 1 through 5 if I've got another way of doing it that I've realized in reel 6 isn't the way, or I allow myself to sort of have that development of the theme over the period of the film. And that means you hear the theme develop as much as the characters. The idea of the film often is, to get from A to B, and people in the story are changing their lives, developing, growing up, going through the pains and wonders of life. So why shouldn't the melody? So I'd say if it's getting boring, it means you're not changing it enough. And over a film, or certainly a TV series, I think you should be very careful about when you bring it back to if your melody is a certain thing, make sure you're always developing it. It should be theme and variations in any of these things. I mean, the other answer to that question, just quickly, is if you've got 2 weeks in and you're really bored with this tune, it may be shit, in which case you should throw it away and go back and write a better one, and then start over. I mean, that's something I've done a lot. There's so many questions here that I could answer, and some I think I have answered. Again, if you go to YouTube, my YouTube page, there's a playlists, and one of them is, I think, every interview I've got on video, and there's hours and hours and hours of it. And in there, you may have answered. I may have already answered some of these questions. So apologize if I'm jumping over things. John, please publish some conductor scores as PDFs. All right, so I'll say this so that everybody really understands it. When I write a piece of music for a film, I do not own that music. It is not my music. Before I wrote a note, I signed a contract, which was called a work for hire contract, which said every note of music I write for the film is owned, and owned to the point at which the film company is the author, or the publisher is the author. That allows me to have no moral rights whatsoever, except in France, and possibly Brazil. There's a couple of places where that doesn't sort of really work, but we'll talk about that another time. But in theory, you give away all your rights, moral rights, everything. They become the author of it forever and ever. And then they give you the right in your contract back to say that you're the composer of it, which means that I don't have any control over what these pieces do after I finish them and they're in the film. They are owned and controlled entirely by a publisher that has been assigned that publishing by the film company as part of the contract. Now, they could do anything they want with it, but producing a full kind of score of a movie is quite an undertaking. There's a lot of work to be done, and it's kind of a niche field. Obviously, I've published things that I can publish, which are the things that I own, and that's the classical music stuff, the Prussian Requiem, Requiem Addendum. We've started on this rather interesting sort of road of doing these piano scores, which is Batu going back and making a more detailed and a more accurate pianistic version of some of the scores of Dragons and Call of the Wild, and we'll endeavour to do that, and we'll endeavour to try and go back and see if we can do some more of the films that way. Some film scores are hard to do just for piano. As for real film scores, well, let's just say there is one maybe we're hoping we'll be able to do, and I'm really hoping we can bring that one out with the help of Hal Leonard and Omni Publishing. So I'm fingers crossed about that, and that would be the first one that has been done. But I can only kind of ask everybody to do it. I have no control of these things, and if I was to put any of this music online, if I was to publish PDFs of these scores, I would actually be in breach of copyright myself. Okay. Would you ever, Alberto Matassans, I think that's how you say it. Would you ever compose an opera? Yes, I did. And about 28 years ago, Gavin Greenaway, who I met at college, and again, Michael Petrie, who wrote the libretto for the Prussian Requiem, we'd been working together forever. So one of the things we did was an opera called An Englishman, an Irishman, and a Frenchman. And it's kind of a fun comic opera. It's serious, but it's got a lot of jokes in it, and it's about 70 minutes long, and we're renovating it right now, doing some rewrites, and they're re-record it. It never really got recorded. It got performed in Germany a couple of times, and so I'm going to tart that up a bit and record it and make an album of that, and hopefully that will be out next year. We were going to, in fact, I would have been in England this past month recording it, but we had to delay that. So maybe the end of the year, or we'll see. So that will come out next year, and that's the first one, and it's basically a chamber opera, which we're just enlarging a little bit for hopefully to get more sort of opera house performances. It's not a terribly huge work and not a huge cast, but I'm hoping that the album of it would allow people to hear it and then maybe program it. Let's see. Andrew Barraclough asks, what is your favorite chromatic medium? Okay. I have no idea, because I have no idea what that is. Yeah, I know I went to college, but I never really went to those classes. Most of my time at college was spent in the electronic music studio, or just giving pieces to other students there to play. I had great teachers and everything, but I was just a performance major in composition, would you believe? And so I never really learned how to understand all the correct terms of classical music. I mean, obviously I read and all that, but I don't have as full, somewhat to my shame, although I'm trying not to allow that to get to me. I've been trying for 50 years for my lack of intellect to not get to me. So a chromatic mediant sounds really interesting, but I don't know what it is. Can Moose Leonard to Dua says, can Moose score in Logic? No, he's a dog. Don't be silly. Andrew Barraclough said, you use them in solo, A major to F sharp major. Okay. Well, that's the thing about music, is that I've learnt it by ear, even though you know, I do have to put it all on paper, and I do. I basically write by ear, and write very carefully by ear, in the sense it's all in the DAW, and I edit things, and I listen very carefully for what I've heard in all the music I've heard. So, I was a viola player for years, so I heard a lot of, voice leading inside parts. So I try and do what sounds musical to me in every part of the score. And then, and that's in the micro. And then in the macro of how I construct things, it's trying to find that kind of perfect formula that seems balanced for melodies. Melodies are this, when I say formula, I mean that there mustn't be a formula for it, in fact, but it's like watching a scientist try and balance a formula, an equation, or in math. There has to be this kind of balance to it, and how or why I've never really bothered to solve, or been intellectually capable of sort of analyzing from a theoretical point of view, but I find myself obsessing over it by only letting go of a melody if I can try and get that balance of shape in it, so that it feels as if it's it's got all the requisite parts of, I guess, all the melodies I've ever heard. Let's see. Spencer Cregan, hi John, thank you for this. If you're able to share, what is the lesson you walked away from solo and working with John Williams? How did it compare to your time working with Hans Zimmer and Harry Gregson Williams? I mean, it's interesting because I was a great fan of Hans, obviously, but he wasn't that far into his film career when I met him and started to sort of work with him, compared with John Williams. So he wasn't an impossible figure to me. He wasn't an impossibly perfect figure. He's a brilliant composer, and I remember being so moved by many of his scores until up to the day I met him, and then still from then onwards, and being always shocked by how he finds interesting things. And Harry was obviously a contemporary who I didn't know when I was in London. I didn't meet until I came to Los Angeles, and was such a good composer that was the shocking part of working with Harry, was that I had to improve my game. So I think that was the thing, is that Hans was a figure who didn't frighten me as much as John Williams did. So when it came to working with John Williams, I did have that terrible kind of feeling that I was absolutely, definitely not worthy. My arrogance was such that meeting Hans meant that even though I thought he was brilliant, I didn't feel that as much. But it's also, I understood how Hans wrote more, because I was very much into technology as well. So that world of technology writing is not John Williams' world at all. He just doesn't. He finds it very interesting and is very, very open to it, but it's not part of his history, and he knows how to do what he knows how to do, and he's the best at doing it. So it was very daunting. I started out by being given all the short scores to all of the Star Wars films, the original, and looking through those. And they are amazing. Everything is there. There's nothing missing at all. It's exactly there, shaped and formed right in front of your eyes in these short scores. And that's what he uses to conduct from, and the orchestrators orchestrate from that, but they really don't need to make much up at all. Everything else is there. But I think it was watching him spot the movie, which we did together. We went through the movie and spotted it, and watching him try and analyze this character, the character development, what this particular character, obviously he knew that character, but he never really scored that character in particular. He'd scored around the character, he'd scored the character's love themes later on in Star Wars. But for this moment in the character, he needed to create something that said, the hero and the troubled youth as well. And that's why he came up with 2 tunes. So watching him ponder everything and go through the film and look at it and analyze it and talk about it, and then going to his house and watching him play these themes and explain them, I relaxed a bit at that point, because I really realized he is just, we do the same thing. I mean, we do look at this the same way, just through a slightly different prism of technology. Or, I mean, you could say that a pen and paper is technology in a way. He's just complete. I mean, I've said this before. The thing about John Williams, he's completely the same as all of us. Everybody who's here as a composer, he's the same as all of us. He's just better. So that's the kick in the balls and the release from the tension of wondering whether or not you can be in the same room with it. He's the same but better, which is great, and that's what we should all be trying to think. It's like, okay, well, everything I do, I'm sure I can make better. Okay. How is COVID affecting your current and future work? What are we looking at for the future of the business? Jake Tanner. It's very, very interesting. It's very hard to say. I mean, I was planning on taking a break this year, I must admit. So it kind of worked out completely fine for me. But there's definitely, it's very, very quiet out there. There's not a lot of work, really isn't. My agent has been saying that, everything's gone very quiet. Danny Elfman's getting very nervous. I was talking to him as well. So I don't know. I think what you might find is quite a few big composers jumping onto things that are a little bit more unexpected. I mean, it's a question of, do they need the money? Some do, some don't, depending on how many divorces they have and how much, they've worked in the past on big films and things, or how much their anxiety level is if they're not working. And some just have to work all the time because that's their world. I'm generally lazy, so I'm happy to just sit and enjoy myself at the moment, and fiddle around with the opera. I've got some other things I'm trying to do. Got a bit of woodwork to do, so I'm happy to do that at the moment. And so I'm decompressing, I think, from the one film I did last year, which doesn't sound very good, but let's see. What's your perspective of the role of psychology in music for understanding the management of sound resources in storytelling? Sarah Saceres. That's an interesting question. I would have, the first part of the question about the role of psychology in music, obviously, I thought you meant the psychology of the people you work with, because in film composing, you are part of a collaboration, and working with other people requires an understanding of the psychology of all of us. But in understanding the management of sound resources in storytelling, that's an interesting question, because I was taught years and years ago that composition is just the organization of sound. I think John Cage probably said it. So the organization of sound in filmmaking and storytelling is, obviously everything that anybody is saying, the actual sounds they're making in the scene, So now we come to the music, and the music it could be diegetic, which is music that is in the scene with them, the music they're hearing. But then score, the underscore, is music they don't hear, but only we as the audience hear. So the relationship between the sounds that the character is making, the sounds that the character is hearing, and the sounds that we as the audience are hearing is a threefold psychological question, which is how is it affecting our understanding of what the story is. And there's lots of answers to that. I suppose there's the osmosis of information that could be happening, or the drawing you in towards the mind, the subtext of a character in the story. And the music can do it 100%, because we know that, because every time I've heard a Brahms symphony, I see everything that is in the film. I mean, I see everything from Game of Thrones to The Sopranos in every movement of Brahms symphonies I've ever heard. But when you're actually doing it to support storytelling, we're all pushing towards the subtext of the story, which is the thing that, not just what people say. So they're saying part of the storytelling sort of system. When you see a line of dialogue, it could be just scaffolding. It's just the build of the storytelling. If you see somebody saying something that's a lie, it's also part of the scaffolding, but it has also a subtext to it, which is now this other thing about the character. Or if you see somebody telling the truth for the first time, or saying something that makes you realize they don't understand what the real story is going on, you now have a perspective on a character. So if you apply that to dialogue, you can then apply that to the sound effects, and then you can then apply that to the music as well. Our relationship with the story as the audience can be manipulated forwards, backwards, up and down in so many different dimensions, from the words that are spoken, the way they're spoken, the environment of sound that they're in, and the environment of sound that we put the audience in as a composer, because we very much are obviously sound design can do this. The sound design can either be environmental, obviously, or it can be kind of reflective. But the composers, unless you're doing music in source, in the scene, again, our job is to do music that speaks of the view that perhaps we can take on a character. So it becomes a sort of 5-dimensional game of chess, really, if you really look at every element of sound in a film, which I think you really should. And I think the great filmmakers do that. That's what Chris Nolan's very good at. Anyway, that's a really difficult and interesting question. Okay, I might have to just wrap up here, because I think we're getting near the hour. Let's see. Let's see, what's a good one to... Alberto Metessons. I don't know why I'm just doing everybody's second name in a French accent, because just because it's a French organization here. I apologize for that. Hang on, what was your question? Oh yeah, will you be needing an assistant when you get a gig? If I get a gig, no, because I do have lots of assistants, and I have currently probably one of the greatest assistants of all time in the history of assistants. So sorry about that. No, that's one thing I should always say to everybody is no, no need for any help. Thank you very much. You know, which always brings me to the question of try and go out and don't be somebody's assistant. I know I've done it now, yeah, and it's a useful way of learning things, sure, but I think also always try and think of yourself as this artist. Be an artist first, so that you have the confidence in your own music, and then you can also learn things. I mean, I was a tape op for a while, and that was very interesting, and you know, I did jingles and I did anything I could think of that sort of helped me practice my craft. Being assistant is, you know, is part of it. It's definitely part of it. It certainly doesn't have to be the first part of it, and it doesn't have to be everything. It can be, for me, it was a form of study and a form of getting to, you know, watch, you know, things happen the way they really happen in the industry, which is very useful. All right. Oh yes, 12:01. Okay, well, I hope this was useful, interesting. I hope I answered some of the questions. I know there are so many there. But farewell to you all, and maybe we'll do it again another time.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you so much.